All right, so we're going to talk about reflexive verbs. What are reflexive verbs? A verb is used reflexively when the subject of the verb is also its object, when somebody's doing something for themselves. So I think of reflexive verbs just like they sound. When I look in a mirror at my reflection, who am I looking at? I'm looking at myself. So how do you know it's a reflexive verb? The verb subject is acting on itself. It is a self-helping action. In the infinitive form, it also ends in se. So acostarse, ponerse, vestirse. All of those verbs that end in se before we conjugate them are reflexive verbs. So they're verbs that I can do something to myself with. Reflexive verbs also require the use of reflexive pronouns. And we'll get to that in a minute. So a verb is used reflexively when the verb is also its subject. So I wash my hair. This is reflexive because I'm doing the washing and it is my hair that's getting washed. So it's reflexive. I'm helping myself by cleaning my hair. So the reflexive pronoun comes before the conjugated verb, but it is attached to the end of the infinitive or the present participle. And the participles are the ando and iendo. And sorry about my formatting here, but it's a little off kilter. So I've got me, te, se, nos, os, se. And that's the normal chart that you would see. So me, plural is nos, te, plural is os, se, and se. So top left, top right box right there. Sorry about the mess up. I like to think of it as conjugating the verb twice. And it's not really conjugating, you're just choosing the pronoun for it. But I like to think of it that way. I like to think of it that way because it helps me remember I have to do something to two pieces of the verb. So you'll conjugate the reflexive verb for the subject or leave it in its infinitive form, but you're going to conjugate the reflexive pronoun every time. When you conjugate a reflexive verb, you first remove and conjugate the reflexive pronoun se. And again, it's not really conjugation, but that's what I think of it. So if I'm thinking of the verb acostarse, I'm going to remove that se. Let's say I'm going to put it in the yo form. I'm going to remove the se, and I'm going to put the se in front of the verb acostar. So now, instead of saying acostarse, it should say se space acostar. I think of the se as the infinitive form of the reflexive pronoun. It's just a placeholder until I have conjugated for the subject. So if I'm conjugating acostarse for the yo form, the yo reflexive pronoun would be me. So I'm going to change that se that I removed and put in front to me. So now what I would look at is me space acostar, right? But don't forget, I also have to conjugate the verb. So now I'm going to conjugate acostar in the yo form. So that would be acuesto. It's an O-to-U-E verb. So who is performing the action? I am. It's in the yo form. So me acuesto. So acostarse, the se came off, went to the front, and it became me acuesto. Te acuestas for you get in bed. Se acuesta for he or she gets in bed. Nos acostamos for we get in bed. And so on and so forth. Let's go back to this slide. Always ask yourself who's receiving the action of the verb. That's the pronoun you're going to use. Put it before the verb you're going to conjugate or attach it to the end of the verb if it'll be in its infinitive or participle form. So if I'm going to say, I like to get in bed at 9, then instead of saying me acuesto a las 9, that means I get in bed at 9, I would say me gusta. And so now since I said me gusta, acostarse is going to stay in its infinitive form. But don't forget, I'm always going to conjugate the se part. So me gusta acostarme a las 9. Or I could say, I'm getting into bed. Estoy acostándome. I can attach it to the end. I could actually put it in front as well. I could say, me estoy acostando. Either one of those works. If you do a reflexive type verb for someone else, it's no longer reflexive, and you'll use the indirect object pronouns for the person receiving the action. Le lavo el pelo a mi hermanito, or lavo el pelo de mi hermanito. But if I'm trying to use it like, or if I'm taking a reflexive verb like acostarse, well, I would never use that, but vestirse. So I get myself dressed, right? Well, I'm a mother of a 2-year-old and I have to help her get dressed. So me visto means I get dressed, but if I'm going to help my daughter, I'm doing the dressing, right? The visto, but my daughter is the one I'm dressing. So it's not a reflexive verb anymore because I'm not doing the action to myself. My daughter's not doing the action for herself. So I'm doing it to someone else, and that would be the indirect object pronouns, which we'll cover later. I just don't want you to get confused. If I'm doing it for someone other than myself, if she's doing it for someone other than herself, if we're doing it for someone other than ourselves, if they're doing it for someone other than themselves, then it's not going to be a reflexive verb anymore. Take note, in Spanish, you're going to use the infinitive after a preposition, even if an infinitive is not used in English. So whenever you have, and these are just some popular ones, con, de, por, para, a, sin. The big ones right here, a, para, de, and por. If you have that right before the blank, like right there, it's definitely going to be in the infinitive right afterwards, okay? So acostarme would be the answer there. Me cepillo los dientes antes de acostarme. So I took the acostarse and I removed the se and I replaced it with me, since I'm the one that brushes my teeth before I get in bed. That makes the most sense. So let's practice. Yo ducharme todos los días, so yo me ducho. That me, and I should have said say. That, let's see, that may came to the front of the verb and become may. I'm sorry, it should have said say, but it came to the front of the verb. It said may, and then I conjugated duchar. I took off the me, and then I just had the verb duchar. I removed the ar ending and added an o. Yo me ducho. Mi familia, I'm going to take that se, put it in front. It just so happens that mi familia is in the bottom of the left-hand side of the pronoun chart, so it's still going to be se. Acostar is what's left because I've gotten rid of se. And then I take off the AR. This is an O to UE changing verb. So it's mi familia se acuesta. María se viste. Mis amigas y yo nos pintamos. Fernando se cepilla. Yo siempre me despierto. Cada mes tú te cortas el pelo. María tiene que. If you put se lava, you're wrong. Que is one of those prepositions. Don't forget tener que means has to, and so you're going to have the infinitive after that. So, María tiene que lavar se. That se is going to stay se because I'm talking about Maria, and she's in the bottom left box, and so is se. So, María tiene que lavarse las manos antes de comer. If I had said I have to wash my hands before eating, I would say yo tengo que lavarme las manos antes de comer. If I said it to my kids, I would say, ustedes tienen que lavarse las manos antes de comer. Mi hermana se seca el pelo con un secador. How would you say, do you prefer to bathe or to shower? Do you know the verb for prefer? Preferir. ¿Prefieres bañarte o ducharte? So, prefieres is the verb. Immediately after a conjugated verb is an infinitive. Just because I have an O there, there's another infinitive. I'm just saying or, so it's still going to be the same type of verb. ¿Prefieres bañarte o ducharte? Maria dresses herself quickly. Maria dresses is vestirse. And so I'm going to conjugate that out. And then rápidamente, I think is what we're going to say. María se viste rápidamente. I wash my hair each morning. Me lavo el pelo cada mañana. And I think this is on the next slide, but when I'm doing reflexive verbs, because I'm saying I'm doing something to myself, it's implied that the thing that I'm washing or putting on to is mine. So I don't have to say mi pelo. I would actually say me lavo el pelo. So that's actually an error. I did that to make a point. The next one, I go to bed early when I'm tired. Me acuesto temprano cuando tengo sueño. Me acuesto because it's I'm going to bed. I'm putting myself to bed. Me acuesto temprano for early. Cuando tengo sueño, when I'm tired. Important things to remember. You have to conjugate the verb or leave it in its infinitive form and the reflexive pronoun. And again, you're not really conjugating the reflexive pronoun, but that's how I like to think of it. I can't say se lavo el pelo because that doesn't make sense. I have to say me lavo el pelo. So I have to pay attention to and give good treatment to that reflexive pronoun, or I'm not going to be correct. That's why I call it conjugating it. The verb and the reflexive pronoun must match for it to be a reflexive verb. So you have to know that if you use me, then the verb should end in O in the present tense. If you use te, it should end in as or es. If you use nos, it should end in amos or hemos or imos. So that's kind of like a double check that I always do. It's a nice little double check that I can just look at both sides of the verb and make sure that they both match. Is the pronoun from the same box as is the reflexive pronoun from the same box as the ending of the verb? Reflexive pronouns should only be used with reflexive verbs and situations. They are not a substitute for regular pronouns. I've seen in the past a lot of students try to say things like, me estudio para la escuela. You don't say me estudio para la escuela. That means I study myself for school. And that is a very vain person who probably looks in the mirror all day long and gets bad grades because they're not studying their schoolwork. I just say yo estudio para la escuela, or I really don't need a pronoun there at all because estudio can only be in the yo form. It ends in O. So I could just say estudio para la escuela, or yo estudio para la escuela, but I don't use me. Now, I brush my hair, me cepillo el pelo. I need the me there because I'm brushing my hair. So make sure you're using reflexive pronouns with reflexive verbs and regular pronouns with regular verbs. And then again, there only when you need it. Down here, it says when you use reflexive verbs, you don't use possessive adjectives to describe the items you're working on. And that's what I was saying before. And you can barely see it here, but it says, hold on, that should be a better view. Me lavo el pelo, not me lavo mi pelo. I wouldn't say me lavo mi pelo. I hear natives say it all the time. It's grammatically incorrect. The power of reflexive verbs. And we'll get into this for a road trip game or a juego de viaje. But reflexive verbs can change the meaning of a verb. So here's some examples. Dormir means to sleep, but dormirse means to fall asleep. Ir means to go, and irse means to go away. It usually means quickly. If you use it in a command form, it's kind of a rude way, like get out of here. Llevar means to carry. Llevarse means to take away. Poner means to put. Ponerse means to put on. So I would never say me pongo la mesa because that means I put on the table, and I don't know how you wear a table. Pongo la mesa means I set the table. So again, I want to use a reflexive pronouns only when I'm trying to do something to or for myself. Okay? And that is the end.